Hey guys, this is Josh from Grapplezilla, and today I'm really happy to have a guest on from Mogo Training. It's Morgan Flaherty. Very deep background in U.S. Greco. He is one of the top guys when it comes to conditioning and training, especially for wrestling as well as most combat sports and sports. And he actually is one of the physical coaches for not only the Greco-Roman team, but the Freestyle team of the Chinese national wrestling team. So Morgan, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, buddy?
Thanks, Josh. I'm doing wonderful. Just here in China in the weight room, finished my workout, and now I have the opportunity to push my intellectual buttons a little bit as I get ready for this little podcast.
Fantastic. You definitely have those. So I was on your site. First of all, you got a great site, great Instagram.
Thank
Tell
you.
me, what is Mogo Training?
So, Mogo Training was a business I started when I was a student at the University of California, Davis, and I was studying exercise physiology. And we had so much theory going on about physiology, about strength and conditioning, all these things, that I wanted to put together a business to practice this sort of thing. And so at the time, it wasn't a real business. It was just what I called my training methods when I was personal training at the local gym called Davis Swim and Fitness. And so I would just say, when I'd make up an exercise or I'd make up a method, I'd say, no, this is just Mogo Training. And then eventually, when I moved to Colorado, I formed a business called Mogo Training. So Mogo Training is just the umbrella name of my training methodology, as well as the company that I started to administer training and strength and conditioning to athletes and general population.
It's a great name.
Thanks.
Now I got a question because like you are extremely knowledgeable, man. Like where do you get all this knowledge from? Like seriously, your in-depth, it's a very interesting thing, these videos and your knowledge. Where's it coming from?
I would have to credit my professors at UC Davis. I was lucky to just when I didn't apply to many schools,
Hmm.
but I went into college to wrestle, and UC Davis in California had a Division I wrestling team that I walked onto, and then I made the team, and they had a program called exercise biology, exercise physiology, which really went into detail about the the physiology of the body, the physiology of muscles, the tissue mechanics, genetics, exercise metabolism, and all of their responses to stressors, the environment, adaptations, and everything along those lines. So it was a very theoretical, but also practical, both from the lab side, but also from the lab as in like microbiological, but also lab as far as practical, like how do we impose training? What are the adaptations to such? And I was able to kind of crunch my degree and get it done in 3 years, but I was a 5-year student because as a redshirt freshman you get an extra year, and so my
Yes.
additional 2 years, instead of just kind of like graduating and leaving, I just took all of the extra courses in exercise physiology and biology without the pressure to like necessarily without the pressure of taking all these additional courses. And so I really had the opportunity to like learn from my professors. Dr. Keith Barr was one of the people that I learned the absolute most from. And then we had Dr. Paul Slisky, Dr. James Shafrath. Those three were extremely influential in how they crafted my mind to think about exercise biology and physiology, and just creating this scientific background create a foundation that made all the other principles of training so much easier to learn, because you had something to weigh it against. Is it good science? Is it bad science? Is it something? 再见. Um, One of the elite marathoners is leaving the weight room now. Um,
Very cool.
yeah, and so once to cut it short is that by by comparing everything to the scientific method essentially, and then also having a good background in research and great mentors, I was able to kind of deduce what I think was logical and what wasn't. And those people then led me to seek out information from other people that became very close, both at the Olympic Training Center and then other
Oh yeah.
professors like Dr. Andy Galpin was someone who I met along the way, who I was able to ask a lot of questions to and learn a lot from. But just being in the circle of highly knowledgeable people all the time always made it easy to like, hey, I have an idea. What do you think? And then forward and backward just really enabled me to like always kind of be checked, but also kind of move in the right direction when it came to these principles of training, especially in a sport like wrestling where the research is very limited. So you kind of have to deduce what you think is right and create your own theory about what is the best training method.
It's interesting because just for audience, like you have a very heavy wrestling background, like actually
Yes.
proper. What is your wrestling background? Because I know there's a Greco, but I mean, you have a serious one. So
Yeah, I started wrestling in high school when I was a freshman in high school, and I had no interest in joining the sport. It was purely a disciplinary act by my principal. I was getting in a lot of trouble, and he just essentially like put down the hammer. He's like, dude, we can send you to boarding school, you can get kicked out of school, or you can go join the wrestling team. And essentially, it was induced by failing and getting in a fight, and the fight was one of the wrestlers on the team witnessed this, and then he kind of like told the principal, "Hey, let's get him on the wrestling team." And then the wrestling coach there, he says, "Hey, you can't wrestle unless you got good grades." And so I like just had no choice. So I got my grades up, and got clean and began training hard. And then I just fell in love with the fact that the sport was like, it allowed you to like take matter into your own hands. Like I really felt like in this sport, if you worked harder, you would reap rewards, and you could see those rewards happen quickly, especially in high school wrestling. Like there are good athletes, there are great athletes, and there are very great athletes. But if you're starting at the bottom and you put in work, you'll make progress, and you can see like, oh, if I fix my double leg, if I get a little bit stronger, like you'll win more matches like relatively quickly as a result of it. And so I found it really rewarding, and I found it kind of comforting that I could see benefits to my work. And then this eventually led me into wrestling in college, and then I wrestled at UC Davis Division One, and I wrestled there for I had 2 full seasons. My first year, redshirt freshman. Second year was like second string varsity. Like I would get thrown in on varsity matches here and there, but we had a guy who was really good. Nexi Delgado. He was a NCAA qualifier 2 time. Dude had the best conditioning I've ever seen out of any athlete. And so I wrestled there for 2 years. They ended up Title IXing our program. So they cut our wrestling team, but I started a wrestling club with a couple of the former wrestlers, and called the UC Davis Grappling Club. And while this was going on, I played rugby and did a little gymnastics until I graduated. And then once I graduated, I was recruited by the Colorado Springs Olympic Committee to wrestle at the Olympic Training Center. And it was Steve Frazier and Momir Petkovic who called me, invited me to come train in Colorado Springs.
Greco.
For Greco, yes. And I chose Greco. Well, Greco chose me at the time because Steve Frazier was writing these letters every month in USA Wrestling Magazine. Hey, we need more wrestlers to do Greco. We need more wrestlers to do Greco because at the time they had like won the world championships in 2007. They had a good team at London, and they were just trying to keep growing the program. But everybody was going into freestyle, and so
yeah.
I was like, okay, you want a wrestler to go full time, dude? I'm here. Like I had no plans after college. I was like, I'll pack my bags. I don't got nothing. I'm just gonna go. So I moved to Colorado Springs, and I just went full time wrestling in Colorado Springs, living near the Olympic Training Center, and training full time every day Greco for essentially until January of this year until I got this position here. So I was like 10 years. 10 years of Greco wrestling full time, traveling
at the top level in the
yes.
US. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's amazing. Now I got a question. Just a lot of guys don't understand. You said is US Greco, you have great Greco wrestlers, but the program is not large. People don't understand how small it is. What do you think what are your thoughts on US Greco versus international Greco? What do I mean by this? What are the challenges you have as an American doing Greco compared to international guys? Because there is some challenges. Like you said, everyone goes to freestyle or they continue folk style and then MMA usually. So
Well, there's a couple challenges, and number one is that there's inherently less reward for doing Greco, in the United States. Like, if you do freestyle, you can get a college scholarship. If you're good at folk style, then you can get a college scholarship. And folk style just naturally transfers over to freestyle fairly well. Like, when people, I mean, coaches actually do encourage their athletes to do Greco in the off season. But it's not their Greco skills that necessarily gets people into college. Maybe it's different in the upper weights because I think some colleges recruit heavier weights based upon their Greco performances a little bit better. But for Division One schools, they're not really recruiting people based upon their Greco skills, as such as their freestyle skills. And so this is one of the big things. Like, just inherently, the system favors folk style and freestyle wrestling just generally. So that's I would say the biggest and number one challenge about why
Do you
USA
think because
Greco.
it's like
Yeah.
culturalized, more culturalized?
I mean, you got to follow the fame, you got to follow the programs.
Yeah.
I mean, the programs in college are folk style. So
Yeah.
because this is it, people are going to go to college for that thing. They're getting recruited for that thing, and they're incentivized to do that. And especially if you can go to school for free, people want to be an NCAA champion. I mean, I think almost, like, for me, my dream was always to go to the Olympics. The NCAA championships and state championships was never, it was a goal, but I just thought those were stepping stones along the line of going to the Olympics. But for me, since I was 9 years old, I've always wanted to go to the Olympics. And so, to me, the Olympic dream was the thing, and then wrestling just became the means to achieve this goal. Because originally I wanted to do it for track and field, but
Oh,
it just
nice.
changed. Yeah.
What weight did you wrestle at? In
In
kilos,
college,
if I remember.
67,
Okay,
67 kilos. Yeah.
that's a very tough weight. That's a
Yeah.
very tough weight. Although in the Pan Ams, US can get through on 67, but when you go against the
Yeah.
Asians at 67, their style, the Asian Greco style, is very tough, especially from the stands. It's very tough. They have
Yeah.
a better, people don't realize there is styles of Greco. So what do you
Yeah, and they're
think the
getting
US
better
could
too.
do? Oh, man, especially Kyrgyzstan and Uzbek, like these, they're on the ball. What do you think US could do to improve Greco? Because that's like a big question. What can happen? How do you improve it?
And I would say there's two approaches: inside out and outside in. So, like, what could happen within the program that could improve Greco, and what could happen outside the program that could improve Greco. I think inside the program, I think one thing that Greco in the U.S. in general doesn't really have enough of is just technical stuff, just technique. There is a whole art form of throwing that kids just learn how to do just because they're fearless, and they just send it. They just grab the hold on something and they just throw it. So they just learn by just trying and failing, which is obviously very good. It's effective. But I think there's crafts, there's technical components, and the more you can get exposed to, the more you have defense and offense for or against. And so I think that technical development will rail round the program in terms of how to use the physicality that the U.S. is known for, to its advantage. So I think as far as within the program, technique is improving, and the U.S. They do what they can to do this. Like, they bring in coaches from around the world to help teach this, and those coaches have really, really made a big difference. But it's one of those things that it takes 4 years for you to see the rewards of such things, right? So it's like, we brought in a new coach last year, and so now he's got 4 years to make an impression on the technical development of our team. And so before that, we had one coach, and we kind of went through like 2 coaching changes within the cycle kind of before that. So, and then the pandemic too, that kind of split it up, and people were going all over the place. Which also splits it up. So just this in general, I think it's not really the U.S. like the federation's fault so much. This is just the circumstances, because people are split up. But if you want to like really develop an international team, then you got to like take your athletes and you got to develop them consistently for that for the games 4 years later.
So I have a theory that, like, I think US could be a powerhouse in Greco. And I think it's because they have, like you said, from the physicality point of view, even the mentality. Like, if you take some of those guys in high school, it's very common for guys to wrestle and also do football. Now, there's a
Yeah.
lot of elements in football with that forward pressure and pushing off that
Yes.
is in Greco. You get some of those guys who
Mm.
are just raw athletes with the technique. It's going to be
Yes.
a Godzilla. Um,
Yes. Yes.
this is an interesting question because you would know. Also, how does training in Greco differ from freestyle and folk style in two ways, in terms of physical preparation and in terms of training frequency? Is it different?
Greco is a lot more physically demanding than freestyle.
Yeah.
Think about it like freestyle requires like more lungs per se, but it doesn't require the same amount of stamina. And so in Greco, you need to have a lot of much more high intensity work that's done for prolonged periods of time, as opposed to freestyle is like stop and go and stop and go, stop and go. You're allowed to disengage and move around. And so that uses different muscles, it uses different energy systems in order to fuel this kind of action. And so it's just a different kind of condition. And so because in Greco, you're literally forbidden you're forbidden from disengaging. You have to create pressure. You have to be more physical, and you have to sustain this for the duration of the match. And then you have to wrestle parterre, which requires you to pick somebody up, throw them over your head, and then do it again. And so the physical demand of Greco is much higher than freestyle, and this requires completely different training methods and mentality. You obviously have a more upright stance, and your footwork isn't the same as freestyle. It's much more solid and heavy, and this also requires different types of strength of your hips and your lower body compared to freestyle, which is a little bit more dynamic and multi-directional in this sort of sense. Where it's like Greco is more so like be strong where you are, be mobile where you are, and then be able to control this point. Versus freestyle is like I'm going to just do whatever I can to get him off balance, even if it requires me getting off balance to get there. And so it's a little bit more of a scramble as far as fighting for position, of course, because you can attack all the body. Versus Greco is more so like, how do I create pressure and release pressure and use angles to get somebody off balance? And this is a lot more of a driving action. There is pulling, of course, but ultimately you pull them to do your attack. But in freestyle, it's way more dynamic. You push, pull, circle, snap, up, down, all around, just so you can get the leg, get them to step, get them out of position, so that way you can take whatever you can in order to progress your attacks and your takedowns or throws, whatever.
Do you find the training frequency? Because, like, I used to wrestle and we used to have 3 practices a day. Morning would be technique, middle of the day would be conditioning, and at night would be a very long practice, like a proper 3-hour practice. But for Greco, I don't know, could they go that way? Because, I mean, what I remember is the Greco guys were just incredibly strong. Like, the strength was noticeable. You couldn't move them. So is it the frequency of overall training different because of recovery, or?
I mean, pretty much all around the world, everywhere I've trained, and I've trained in over 20 countries. It's always generally 2 times per day, every day, except 2 days a week or maybe once a day. And, generally speaking, there's wrestling practice at least once a day, sometimes twice. And then you sprinkle in your physical development depending on where you are in the season. Farther away from competition, you have more physical development. Closer to competition, you have more live goes and more wrestling. And so as far as like the training frequency, it's generally the same between freestyle and Greco. What they do within that is a little different, because in Greco, they have a little bit more physical preparation, and it might be integrated into the wrestling practices more than freestyle would do. But generally speaking, it's very similar, very similar.
It's interesting, there was a study about, I think 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where they wanted to measure a Greco wrestler's body versus a freestyle wrestler's body. And they noticed, the one thing they noticed was the abdominal wall of a Greco-Roman wrestler was much thicker. They had much more developed abs. So maybe that
Yes.
has part to play. Now, here's something really interesting for our guys watching this. So Morgan, as we said, is basically in charge of the physical training for the Chinese national wrestling team. Now, how's that going, Morgan? Because you are like, that is an awesome thing. I have my thoughts on Chinese athletes, and I think it's cool. And how's it going?
It's wonderful. I took this job for a couple reasons. Number one is that I thought it would be an awesome challenge. I felt like, uh, I had some bit of a reputation, but I believed that I could still I wanted to prove my methods work, even in the most difficult circumstances. And so 7 months, or 8 months away from the Olympics, we needed to qualify more athletes to go. When I first got here, we had 3 athletes qualified. And so that's why they called me. They said, "Hey, we need you to can you move to China and train our team? We need to qualify more athletes to the games." And so I came in, ran some tests, and then trained these athletes pretty intensively for 3 months. And then we went to the qualifiers, and then we qualified 9 more athletes to go to the Olympics. And so it was very challenging because
Wow.
I didn't speak Chinese or anything like this. So I had to come up with ways to communicate. I had to come up with ways to share the programs, demonstrate the exercises. We have frequent meetings, lots of reports because the Chinese method and their diplomacy is very strong. And so everything that I had to do would be written down and presented on to not just me, but the people above me, because also this is a government organization. So they got to make sure that everything I'm doing is legit, and they send it to the university and this, that, and the other. So that was very intense, but I actually kind of loved it, because I liked to kind of legitimize everything that I was doing and kind of show, hey, this is why this works. This is why this is it. So it kind of reinvigorated some of my theory and my philosophy about it, even though most of the time I had to work on the fly because sometimes things didn't go according to plan, and they never go according to plan, of course. So just being adaptable was something that I got to exercise a little bit more. But if you ask anybody, that's actually maybe my strength, is that my ability to work on the fly and be really adaptable, maybe the thing that I'm the best at. And so coming to this program, I kind of was inadvertently put in a position that was what I'm best at, as opposed to, some people are very rigid in their theory and their methodology, which works really well for some programs, and it's what some programs definitely require. You'll see it's very common in football weight rooms to be very regimented, all right, boop, lift, boop, rest, boop, go, boop, reload, boop. And it's an art form. It's totally beautiful. But I couldn't do this because I don't speak the language, so I can't tell them what to do. I had a translator, but I ended up just never mind, I'm going to start learning Chinese. And so I started learning how to speak Chinese and communicating to the athletes what I wanted them to do. And then, and coming through and designing the programs for them, and then obviously going through the motions of each succession of the program for each phase leading up to the qualifiers leading up for the Olympics. I kind of got a little bit sidetracked, but the challenges, they were numerous, but it was also absolutely wonderful, the experience and everything around that.
Also good Chinese food.
The food is amazing. The food is absolutely amazing. I digressed a little bit. I apologize.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, man. It's very interesting because that's actually what I wanted to know. Which leads me to my next question, which is very interesting because I've been noticing Chinese wrestlers. There was, I forgot his name. I'm just not good with names so well. But there was the heavyweight wrestler who's been in freestyle for, I guess, the last 8 years.
Thanks away.
This guy is a beast. He is a beast, man. Yeah. I have seen that guy. And that guy, I was always saying, if he just I think it's more the program. The program needs to mature a bit, but he has all the qualities. He's got the aggression. Yes. Man, you don't want to meet that guy in a back alley. You know what I mean?
He's awesome. Yeah,
But
I was lucky. I got to train him individually. So some of the athletes that come in as a team, and
yeah,
I picked him and I trained him. He's a veteran. You know, he's not on the younger side of the athletes, and so I trained him one on one to help develop his physical qualities and
yeah.
help keep him in the sport. You know, he's on the he's yeah he's
He's
37
at
now.
that
So
age. Oh, okay.
yep,
So
yeah,
he's basically he's seeing the sunset. So, but on a
in
wonderful
a
career.
sense. Oh yeah, he was wonderful to train for sure.
Yeah. So, how is like in terms of the national side? How is the Chinese Greco and compared to the freestyle? Which one is more culturally or like where do, are they going to both? Like usually a country will be a little bit more to one. So,
I would say China favors its Greco team more, as far as like the federation favors like the teams. But actually, they're really is diplomatic the right word? They're really diplomatic. You get medals, you get more favoritism. They don't really like if you do better or worse. They don't really care which team it is. It's like
okay, they're
you get
fair.
medals. Extremely fair. It's very, very, very fair. Which I love to see because it's just like, you know, sometimes there's an impression of what China is like, and it's absolutely untrue. It's things here are they're almost too fair, maybe like cold in a sense by the fairness, where they were like essentially uh, before the qualifiers, we had zero athletes qualified in freestyle. And so this was a big problem. They essentially said, if you don't qualify any athletes to the Olympics, the program is done for the next 4 years. And so I was like, this can't happen. This can't happen.
Do you,
So then we intensely trained them,
and
and we
how many made
essentially saved
it?
the program. Three,
Oh wow!
four,
In a what?
four. We
Okay,
qualified four. We
so
qualified four.
here comes my next question because this one's very
Yeah.
interesting. So I wrote the questions down because my memory is not the best. I'm getting old.
Hey,
So,
no worries, no worries. I'm excited.
is there a certain grouping of weight categories that the Chinese are better suited to because of population genetics? It's kind of like in Japan. Like everyone's said, they're surprised about Japanese wrestling, but actually Japan always had a really good wrestling program in the lightweight and women's. Women's, they're
Mm,
amazing. But in China, I would imagine just like I grew up in Canada. We have a lot of Chinese people. Uh, I had a lot of Chinese friends. You didn't have many gigantic Chinese guys, but like all the Russian kids, you would have either small or monsters, right? So
yes.
is there a certain
So,
size or weight class, or is it everything?
you know, what's really interesting about the diversity within China is as a Westerner, you don't really know what the diversity is in China. But coming over here, they talk about there are 54 different ethnicities of China. And
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah, and they call them ethnic minorities. And so different regions of China have different minorities and different ethnic populations. And so while it does seem that China is more catered towards the smaller weight categories, what I've
Mhm.
actually kind of found it to be quite binary. You have larger athletes and smaller athletes. Typically, the larger athletes come from northern China, closer to Mongolia and also the mountains, and then lower weight categories come from the south of China. And this is actually just a kind of a genetic difference between the north and the south of China. And so, yes, there is a little bit more favoritism towards the southern smaller weight categories because there's also more dense population down south. Versus up north, you know, you have Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Russia, and those typically have bigger, more mountainous persons versus the
Also, the
south.
diet probably had played like a lot of
Exactly,
lamb, and that increases testosterone
exactly.
from lamb fat and stuff. So maybe
Yes,
nuts as well. So
yes.
that's it.
And
So you're
China's been
saying,
around for
okay,
thousands of years, and
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's a little bit more complex in that sense. It's like, does it favor those lightweight classes and the higher weight classes? Yes, it does. But also, how much of the athletes, just like in the US, like how many athletes that are pulled from the middle weight classes to do other sports? because they do select athletes in their school programs for different
Yeah.
schools or for different sports, excuse me. Like if someone is just like powerful in general, then they'll be pulled into weightlifting, and they do this based upon their jumping mechanics, the muscular development of their hips,
In China.
as well. Yeah. So like in like when they're
Okay.
like 7 to 9 years old, they go through essentially a fitness test, and they have different scouts that'll go to certain schools, and they just put them all through tests, see how far you jump, see how high you jump.
That's
They
interesting. Yeah.
they look at the muscular development of your body, and they look at the proportions of your limbs, and they're like, okay, well, you're going to be well suited to this, you're going to be well suited to that. And athletes have a choice; they can choose to whether or not they want to do that. A lot of the times, they choose to because it's it's a better life to be a professional athlete than it is to not. Oftentimes,
Absolutely.
depending on where the province is and where in the situation of that area.
That's interesting because the Soviets, if I remember correctly, I had an uncle who was telling me that they used to do it at birth, and then after a few years, they would check the bone structure. So, for example, when Karelin was born, they were like, "Listen, weightlifting, wrestling, like he had it." But
Mm,
I think that's a smart way to do it. I mean, obviously, there's passion and stuff, but when you get to that high level, your genetic build and everything does make a difference. The type of muscle matter you have, it's a more fast twitch, slow twitch, your joint
yeah.
size, etc. So yeah, that's actually quite smart. The Chinese seem to have a really if that's the way they're going, it seems to be a winning formula. And talk
Mm,
about winning formulas. Was there any influence from the Chinese weightlifting culture into wrestling? And the reason I'm asking for the audience is that China has one of the best, if not the best, or top three weightlifting programs in the world. They are producing like it's a
yes.
champions factory. So do you find
Mm,
that maybe in the discipline or anything, did any crossover come to wrestling?
not so much. Not so much. I am a big fan of Olympic weightlifting for wrestling. It's concise, it's clear, it develops power. It's in Greco, it's very similar to the movements of the sport. So I really like Olympic weightlifting, and that I spent a chapter of the training teaching the Olympic weightlifting, and especially when I go coach the junior teams, that's one thing that I spend a whole day on is like, hey, how do we do the weightlifting mechanics properly? So that way we can ensure that we have a longer career within strength and conditioning, utilizing these weightlifting motions. Because if somebody can't do a weightlifting motion, then and they're in a competition season, it's too late. You have to kind of work with what you got and whatever derivatives they're capable of doing. Otherwise, you're losing an opportunity to stimulate the adaptations you need to reach the training goal that you need within that cycle. So I really value it, but it's not as common within wrestling here as it is in other places. And I'm actually seeing it phase out generally for it within the strength and conditioning realm, and for good reason. It has a very specific use, and the efficacy of weightlifting is very uh, um, needs to be properly prescribed. Let's put it this way. Otherwise, you can be wasting time and you can put athletes at risk of injury. But for me, I've been Olympic weightlifting for over 12 years. So for me, and I've had great coaches to teach me how to
Plus
Olympic
your
weightlift.
knowledge as well of the body, you just can understand exactly.
Yeah, that does help. But with weightlifting, you can be as good of a scientist as you want, but just the exposure to high level coaches. Um, I was coached by some excellent people, Jackie Berube, Aaron Black, Zygmunt Smallers. Um, those three excellent U.S. national weightlifting teams, Olympic champions, national champions, world medalists. They were Hirosh Dimas too. He was at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs while I was there. I was able to learn from all those people how to weightlift. So just being able to learn from them and then teach it again has made my training much more easy. And also programming is easier too because I can use one exercise to a specific exercise to accomplish a goal that I really need.
Yeah, I've always wondered because there are different mentalities in wrestling, for example. Like
Yeah.
Americans, like I know in Russian culture, a lot of the Russian wrestlers, they call them like Americans, like the Captain America. They're coming, man, and they're coming to destroy you on the mat, right? And then there's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
Cuban where they wait a little, and then when they explode, it's full out. And the Russians a little more. Is there a difference in training mentality between the Chinese wrestlers and American wrestlers, and also wrestling mentality?
Yes, Chinese wrestlers are all gas, no brakes. All gas, no brakes. That's
Like
just
dang,
that's
like dang.
yes, yes. This is their approach, and this is especially true in women's freestyle and men's Greco. Um, Men's freestyle, Deng is an exception. Those guys are extremely athletic, and so they kind of they're like the exception to the rule. They're just like exceptional gymnasts, and so they're super funky, and they have the ability to just scramble through just about anything. They're unbelievable athletes in such a wide variety of ways. And so for them, we actually used different styles of training because we kind of wanted to cultivate this these skills without kind of making them a little bit too rigid in their movement qualities. And so, but in general, the Chinese method is all gas, no brakes. Um, as far as uh, how they approach their matches, how they approach their training, especially how they approach their training, and just the method because they can do this. They have the authority to push their athletes to that level.
Absolutely. You know, this year was an amazing year for wrestling. We had the Paris Olympics. Uh, Obviously we've had a discussion before, like I spoke with Morgan about it, and Morgan had some really interesting things to say. um Obviously Greco was great. The US, I don't think they had such a strong thing. I think, like you said, they're in that building now,
Mm,
but I think the women's in the US, for example, did really well. I think they, like,
mm,
Amelia Elore, and you also had Kennedy Blades with that. I mean, that's a 5.5 point throw I've ever seen. And
amazing.
the men, like, they get a lot of flack, right? And I think it's unfair. What are your thoughts on the Paris Olympics, especially in terms of the US?
I thought the U.S. team did great across the board. I mean, yes, people may be disappointed about how the U.S. men didn't do, how the U.S. men did or didn't do based upon what they were anticipated to do. But the Olympic Games are a unique event for this reason. I think, anything, first of all, in wrestling, anything can happen. There's like, you never know how the referees are going to act. You never know how your opponent's going to act, how they prepared for you or the other people. All these things play a big role. Another thing that we have to consider is how does people and the athletes' strategy shift when a team like Russia has left? And a lot of athletes, they moved on, they moved to other teams, and people were even uncertain of whether or not they were going to compete. All the U.S. guys were ranked number one across the board. And so they then became the number one people to scout against. And so this scouting
Oh,
made the U.S. athletes have a higher chance of being beaten just because of more people were prepared for them. And then, like, I would say it's difficult to prepare for 100 people or 16 people, I suppose,
absolutely.
or 8 people. Yeah, 16 people. It's easier to prepare for one person if that's the one person that you need to beat if you're trying to get a medal, versus one person preparing for 16. This is much different, especially when it comes to a lot of the guys from the U.S. were newcomers, right? So they hadn't wrestled any of these international people, and then now they have to rely just on their skill in order to win a medal. And yes, it has been done before, but a lot of these guys are coming in from like college programs and just wrestling the college style. And so this makes it more difficult to perform at the Olympic Games. And if you're not an extremely physical or extremely athletic kind of guy that
Mhm.
can depend on your athleticism and to win, then you're going to need a little bit more technique and a little bit more strategy in order to win these matches. Not something that you can just like win the Olympics on in like 3 years, or excuse me, 3 months of preparation since the trials. Um, I think everybody did absolutely fantastic. It's been a great quad for the U.S. team in general, and we should give these athletes much more credit. Like a lot of these athletes had to push so hard just to make the Olympic team, and maybe they peaked a little bit too soon. Maybe they didn't train all the way through like they could have, but I don't know. I thought that they looked great. I thought they looked like they appeared they were in great shape. Yeah, I mean, it looked like their technique was pretty good. Maybe some strategy could have been. From what I saw, it seemed like some match strategies got a little changed somewhere in
Yeah, I
there,
think so too.
and I don't know if it happened there. But like I said, there are so many things that happen behind the scenes. Like maybe someone was fostering an injury, maybe their nutrition didn't go so well. It's unpredictable, and also how do you respond to this environment in Paris and all these sort of things. Like some people are lucky in that they don't have a negative response to the area
Also, they didn't have like
and
air
the food.
conditioning in the rooms, and there was a lot of factors that came.
Yeah, these aren't excuses. It's just a matter of the fact that things change, and you can do your best to prepare for all of them, as best as you can. But but this gives coaches for the next Olympics more of an opportunity to know, hey, the climate for sports is changing, and now we need to prepare for more things in general, and or not just certain athletes, but certain styles and this, that, and the other. And so these are some of the my opinions on the matter.
I think you have some good points there. I think uh, definitely when you have a big bear fall out of there, which is Russia, all of a sudden there's no doubt the Americans were preparing for Russia. Like that was their number one, and all of a sudden that wasn't coming down. So now I think it also had something to do on their mentality. I think there's other things too. It was a rather young team compared to the old. Like everyone thought it was going to be the same guys coming, for example, Taylor and yeah, and they might have peaked a bit too early too. I think that's it. It's funny because I get these messages. People are like, "The U.S. is done." I'm like, "What are you talking about? The U.S. of all countries is not done. Wait till Los Angeles. You're gonna see a bunch of Captain Americas come, and
Mm.
they're gonna smash." And overall, I think they
Y-
did okay. Like
mm.
you had Spencer. I think he did amazing. You had Brooks.
Yes.
I think Brooks was phenomenal. He got Magomed Ramazanov. It could have gone either way, and he
Mm.
just happened to get. Ramazanov was a very sticky wrestler, and he just got into the wrong position. But I think if had Brooks won against Ramazanov, he would have actually won against Yazdani. Even if
Mm.
Yazdani was healthy, he would have given him a fight. You had, I mean,
Mm.
another one was Mason Paris. Mason Paris, I think he just got the wrong guy on his first round. I think he's an amazing wrestler. I just think
I
he
think
got the
actually
Mongolian. Yeah,
I think you actually brought up a really good point there too. Is a lot of the U.S. wrestlers got really tough draws early in the tournament too,
very tough,
and
bro.
so those draws like that affects the rest of the tournament for you. Like
For sure.
if you have a hard first match, it's hard. Like yeah, you're cutting weight and you're having that hard first match, right? Or maybe maybe your weight's perfect. Doesn't matter. You're pushing yourself to the emotional, physical, mental limit on this first match. It's more difficult to recover for that for your second one. And so maybe even though your second opponent is not as good, you cannot give the same performance as if you're warming up in the tournament as the brackets are intended for you to do, right? As opposed to getting the number one guy right out the match. And that goes both ways. Like some more guys that were high seeded also had tough opponents in their first match when they're supposed to, like all these little things, they all add up too. Especially if that guy has been gunning to beat you and you have to give everything you got just to make it out of the first round. That's tough. And I know
Oh
Spencer
yeah.
Spencer had one of our guys uh, first round, and this guy is the guy that Spencer went against is good, like very good. And I think that if they were on different sides of the bracket, they probably could have met in the finals. They could have met in the finals, or our guy could have made it to third place in a different situation. Um, so it's one of those things. where the position in the brackets also makes a very, very, very big difference. And you know, that happened with Amit too. She had a really tough first match. Her first match was, I think, almost like her toughest match. And
Yeah.
so, and you see in her second match, she was quite dominant the rest of the tournament. But I remember watching where it kind of looked like she was picking up steam as she recovered from her second match. A little bit after, like she was gaining her confidence and then going again. And it was just awesome to see how that happened. But you know, that's a champion.
It's how the
Too.
cookie
Like,
crumbles,
these are the
right?
things. Yeah, yeah. So
She's got I mean, her and Sarah, I always forget the name, Hellbrandt.
Hildebrandt, yeah.
They are really, also Kennedy, they are really talented. I mean, and I think they're just, I think it's interesting because U.S. wrestling, for especially the women, I think has
Mm,
it's just getting better and better, you know? And I
mm,
think the men, like, I just think it's unfair. I think people just, some people just love to see, like, there's three countries that will always be dangerous in wrestling. That's going to be U.S., Russia, Iran. And like to
yes.
discredit based upon, and I don't think they had a poor performance. Actually, if they were another country, like, wow, they got bronzes, but because it's the U.S. and they are at the pinnacle of the sport, I guess people just like to jump on people, on the king when they're down. That's what it
Mm.
is. And
I mean, if I
I
was
didn't
to
like how
evaluate,
people were, yeah.
yeah, if I were to evaluate what happened in the U.S. team, I would look at what happened, what happened like the week or two leading up to the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the Olympics. Like what happened in that
Hmm.
time? Um, because I think that might have had the greatest influence on how they performed at the Olympics, as far as collectively, because it was kind of like a group thing. And so, you know, how did they act as a team together? Of those guys, like who was an influence on what other athletes in what way or another? Because those sort of things also make a pretty big difference
Yeah.
at a tournament as you get closer to competition. Um, so this is another thing to consider.
Um, Now let's go into something not wrestling. Just how is
Yeah.
uh how is it to be in China? It looks like a fun, good place. I've seen some of your live things, but you were in like some kind of ninja race that looked pretty hardcore. Like it looks like a cool place, man. I want to visit. Are you in Shanghai? Where are you?
I'm in Beijing. And so, Beijing, this is like the Olympic Training Center here. So this is my office. This is our weight room.
Wow.
Faster, higher,
Whew.
stronger. We got all our equipment here, and here's squat
Beautiful.
racks. So this is my office, and so I live in Beijing, but we have three Olympic bases, and so we travel between these three Olympic bases depending on the season, and we train as a national team all year round, and China in general is just it's amazing. It's like the image I had of China when I came out here was so different than what it is while I'm here. I mean, the more I travel, the more I realize around the world, people are the same. We all like the same things. We all want the same things. We all love each other the same, and people are generally very kind. And so, I don't think necessarily U.S. media necessarily paints that picture.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
and so I've been having nothing but an absolutely wonderful time here. The food is amazing. It's healthy for the most part. If you don't eat street food all the time, you're gonna eat really good healthy food. Um,
Is it spicy?
and also
Like really spicy?
very, very spicy. And like here's an example. In China, they love the food. It's such a national pride. It's like when you say "How are you" in English, right? You say "How are you," based upon your emotion, and that's like how you ask someone if they care. In China, it's not. That's not what it is. In China, it's have you eaten?
Oh
And
wow.
so like this
I
kind of
love
tells
it.
you that like this is the priority as far as their
Hospitality also. Huh?
yes, their hospitality, but also their approach to like food and how important it is in their culture. And so I love that.
That's
Um,
amazing.
I love that part of the the culture. I love the people are so nice. It's fun learning Chinese, Mandarin. Um, and what I like about learning new languages is that, when you learn a new language, you redefine how you think about the world, because language is how you describe the world to yourself. So, um, so it literally creates another form of perspective on the world around you. And so I feel like I'm improving my perspective just by nature of learning another set of words. So that's one thing that I absolutely love. The training for the teams is very intense. They live it. They live it all the time. They live training, they eat training, they sleep training. We all live together all the time, every day. We train together. We're in it 100%. And so this is something that I also absolutely love, because I don't know, it's just a level of dedication that I've always had. And so just to kind of be part of that as a coach is also very cool. It lets me really like focus on the craft and try to develop it to the best of my ability too. And so this is something I really value. And China is also huge and beautiful too. Like the natural phenomenons around China are just absolutely amazing. I started looking at the mountains in China and trying to figure out which ones I want to climb. Climbed one of them so far, called Shan, and this is where apparently Buddha got enlightened. And so this is where, so digging into this 3,000 plus year old history, you keep digging out these really, really interesting, cool things about this country that has this rich history. And so, it's just, I just keep peeling the onion and learning. Meanwhile, living wrestling, training, conditioning, and also trying to pick up from these cultural traditions that have been here for thousands of years too. So,
are you staying in China for a while, or you're coming back and forth to the US? Or
I will be coming back and forward to the US, but I did sign an additional contract to continue coaching here. So,
that's cool.
So I'll be here for a little while.
Well, if I'm ever in China, we'll go for some wontons and maybe some. You can give me a 5-point throw.
I'll show you anything you want to go. I mean, definitely Beijing is a good hub to go if you want to see the old history of China, or as far as like it's the capital city, right? So it's politically correct here, and but there's so many different provinces with many different teams. Excuse me, I'm thinking wrestling. Many different history, many different regions, different cuisines, and all that sort of things. And so it makes this country just absolutely amazing. Like, this year, my responsibility will be going to each individual province, to each individual team, and evaluating and training those individual regional teams. Just like the US has its RTCs, China has its RTCs too. And so I'll be going to them and then evaluating the programs, training the programs, implementing a new system, and helping getting those athletes ready with the system for the next 4 years, so that way they can prepare for the Olympics later.
That's amazing, and that's a lot of responsibility, and it just shows your level of understanding of this. So, now Mogo, what does the future Mogo look like? Of course, it looks very Chinese at the moment, but the rest of 2024, 2025, I think we answered it. But Mogo, where are you going to take Mogo? Because this is something very interesting now.
I think about this not every day, but every week for sure. My Sunday I reflect, and I'm trying to think about how I can give back to the sport of wrestling domestically. I did leave the US so abruptly that I kind of feel like I have unfinished business there. I still have a gym in the United States, and so right now I'm trying to keep my gym up and running. And some of my current clients are there training. But when I was younger and I was wrestling, I had a lot of people help me with training for next to nothing and take care of me. So I'm trying to find a way that I can do that for people in the US that are trying to do the same thing. My big vision is that I want to provide elite training to all people. There's a lot of information all over the place about training and health and fitness and everything like that. And everything gets, I heard this and I hear that. And a lot of times it's a lot more simple than we think. And also we just need to be more direct and a little bit maybe more disciplined in our thinking and our approaches to this information. And so, my Mogo training slogan is elite training for all, is because I try to really cut through all that and just provide you with what you need in order to really be successful with your training. And it's difficult because it requires a level of discipline that requires a simplicity and not looking for the prettiest, newest, shiniest thing. So the future of Mogo, I think, is going to be a little bit more intellectual as far as like more writing, and I'm going to try to find try to make more videos. I say try because I'm challenging to figure out how I can connect to the masses with information that they find relevant, where I'm not like ostracizing them or myself, because I do deal with elite athletes who are such a unique situation here. It's not very relatable. And so try to cut the information to make it simple for everybody is something that's I think important, and I want to find a voice to help people more often reach their respective goals in a way that they find applicable to them, because they can too live life to the fullest, given their level of fitness, and with an inspiration that they find they're capable of doing. And this is what I hope to inspire people to do. And then of course, if somebody is a wrestler or a grappler, I want to help you get to your best performance on the mat and your best life off the mat, so that way you can continue to grapple and continue to wrestle for as long as you want. Safe, healthy, strong, perform well, and have fun. Of course, have fun. This is the name of the game. And so this is kind of what I want to do in the short term. And then at the end of the day, I love art, and I want to tie it into some sort of art project. So this is what I'm looking to do in the long term, is try to take all of this information, maybe write a story or make art that's relevant about wrestling, the story of wrestling, my story of wrestling, or just wrestling training, this, that, and the other. And so I still kind of ruminate on this a little bit. But short term, just providing information for people about wrestling, about training, about health, so that way they can live the strongest life ever. Because I want you to be exposed to my elite training methods, no matter who you are and what you do.
Man, I think you're the guy to do it. It's kind of interesting you said about art. There was I think he's British Olympic judoka. I don't know if he took gold or he medaled, but he became like a very famous artist. He's older, so there is some kind of tie from there. And I also know another guy who was in the Brazilian national wrestling team who became a sculptor. And he said, I was such a wrestler, I didn't know that in my brain I was creative. So that's really interesting. And this is my last question. How can people reach you and know more about Mogo? And how can they help you to get your message out? Or if they need help, how do they reach you?
Right now, my best platform is Instagram, and I have at Mogo Training for like my training, wrestling, and health information and advice. And then I have my personal account, which is Morgan Flaherty, just at Morgan_Flaherty. You can find that from my Mogo Training. But just go to Mogo Training and just like everything, comment on everything, and share things. That's like the best thing you can possibly do. And just shoot me a DM if you have questions, and I'll gladly answer your questions. I answer questions all the time. And
by the way, he does, because I've asked him questions and he answers. So just saying, he really does.
I think this is actually, I think, my best way to communicate with people. When I make a video, I kind of am like, I don't know what to tell people. It's kind of out of context. But when I am asked a question, you see, I can just kind of go, boo! I can just kind of keep going and going. I'll give more information that maybe is needed. And so this is what I like to do. Maybe that's my approach, is just answering questions. But yeah, please go to my page. Please follow me on Instagram, and like, comment, and share. Those are the best things you can possibly do. And I also have a YouTube channel at Mogo Training. Same thing. This is where I have exercises that I come up with, or exercises that I use in my training program, which is found online. You can also find this on my Instagram as well. I have an ongoing, I call it the Wrestling Club. And it's just a strength and conditioning program that's on a training app that I helped develop a long time ago. I don't take a lot of all the credit for it, but I just was like a bird chirping about how I think the program should look. And anyways, and this program is awesome. I've been using it for almost 6 years now, and I just have ongoing training all year round for wrestlers and grapplers, and it's very high level as well. So you have access to an elite level programming for hardly any cost. So I have tiers of this, my wrestling focused one and then regular fitness based one. So that's my service that I can provide to you at low cost. And of course I can be hired as an individual coach as well, but that's additional. So,
which I highly recommend. I definitely highly recommend. Grapplezilla approved. Morgan, it's really been a pleasure. You are a very cool guy. We've been speaking a lot on Instagram. Yeah, I'm very happy to have known that. I think you're doing a great job in China. I think that they're in really good hands with a guy like you with your knowledge and your methodology. I want to say thank you very much for coming on the Grapplezilla podcast. It's been more than a pleasure.
You, Josh.
Guys, I'm going to put Morgan's socials down, and I'm going to start sharing a lot of stuff of his on Instagram. So guys, I really, really recommend you guys follow him. And if you have any questions, ask him. And if you can't, ask me, and I'll point you in his direction, And Morgan, have a great day. Shay, as they say in China.
Shishi. Shishi.